Hey everybody, tonight I'd like to read to you a chapter from my fourth book. This is Opalescent Immersion. It is the fourth book of the Endeavor series and it is about the mermaids. Woohoo! We finally got here. I'm going to read chapter 2 to you tonight. Do keep in mind that I'm still working on this book. I hope that it is released late this year or early next year. That'd be 2017 would be the early part. So there might be a little bit of some wiggle room whenever I go back to revise. I'll probably revise this 2 or 3 more times and do an edit or two, at least. You know how it is. But I think I have this solid enough that I can share it and give you just a sneak peek into the mer world. Okay, so this is chapter 2, Through the Murky Waters. Here we go. Hope you enjoy. Augustine gripped the rock ledges with the tips of his calloused fingers and pressed his body against the underside of the old, narrow bridge. The guards were not as quiet as he was, and that was the only thing that had saved him this morning. He did not normally scavenge from areas so close to enemy villages, but the urgent need for a specific plant had forced his hand. He thought of the people dying at home as he clung to a spot. He had to survive. As long as he kept quiet, he had a chance. He had planned this trip to coincide with a shift change, but once again they had altered the hours. He knew better than to waste his energy reacting to the situation. No matter what they threw at him, he would adapt and beat them at their own game. He was one of the top scavengers for that reason. Many of his associates died at some point or the other, but a handful of them had survived and thrived in this dangerous job. The small group of scavengers met once a day to compare notes and plan the next day. Patrols had increased over the last 2 months, and the times and paths of the guards changed frequently. The men kept at it like a puzzle to be solved. The good ones did anyway. The week didn't last long. Most of the recruits died on one of the first few trips. It seemed ridiculous to keep training men when most of the hard work was for nothing, but every now and then they would find another man who flourished at the job. He looked down at the crevice where he had been a moment before. Would they check it? This particular community garden was on the outskirts of town in order to keep the plants as pure as possible. He hoped that the one below him wasn't on their current route. The stealing was necessary. There were no gardens around his community. At least they only had to survive this way for a little longer. Change was coming. Augustine pressed his body harder against the stone and thought of the path he had taken to get here. Should he take it back? The decision could mean life or death. He would be faster if he kept to the planned path, but it would also be dangerous. It had been a daring move to travel along the main pathways of the guards, but one that had paid off. He had traveled swiftly this morning, for none of the guards he passed were looking for a scavenger that close. His backup route was slower and safer, and there was a safe house in a village if he needed to hide for a short time. As a last resort, he could travel through the wasteland. He could hide easier from the guards, but he would also be hunted by something else. The strap of his bag slipped down his shoulder to his elbow. He slowly shifted, pulled it back up, and secured it better. Foolish mistake. Amateur mistake. The guards had passed, but still he clung to a spot. This was the moment most newbies died. They let their nerves get to them and bolted too early. He would stay long enough for the guards to travel further down the path before he started the journey home. The soft sounds of a female voice seized his attention. He looked down and swore under his breath. She sang as she collected plants in her large basket. How would she sneak up on him? He frowned. If she looked up, he would be discovered. He had killed before, but only guards and only when his life was in immediate danger. Could he kill an innocent woman in order to escape detection? He thought of his daughters at home, then closed his eyes and hoped that she would leave without spotting him. He would kill if he had to. Many lives depended on him returning. She screamed. Augustine looked down at her as he made a last-minute decision about his escape route, but the young woman was not looking up. A shark had grabbed her arm and pulled her away from the garden. She screamed again. Blood spread through the water. Where were the guards? The shark pulled the woman toward the wasteland. Augustine swore again. He shoved his fin into the bridge and launched himself after the girl and the shark. He could see her trying to fight her way free now, but the shark's grip was relentless. He reached for his knife and swam faster. He wanted to shout to her and tell her what to do, but she wouldn't stop screaming. The shark took a left around a large boulder. Augustine did too. He was closer now. He was slimmer and fit, but most of all he didn't have a flailing woman hanging out of his mouth. He smiled. It had been a long time since he had caught and wrestled a shark. Help me! He could hear the words of the woman's cries now. "Stay calm," he shouted back. "I'm coming." He swished his fin harder now and reached forward with the knife. Almost. The shark shifted. Augustine caught up. He was swimming above the beast now. He burst forward and plunged his knife into the shark. More blood clouded the water. The shark let go of the woman and took a right turn into the tall sea kelp. Augustine grabbed the woman and pulled her to his chest. She was losing a lot of blood, but still aware. He settled her on the ocean floor and reached into his medical bag. There. He wrapped the bandage around her arm and secured it with a knot. "You have to swim home," he said gruffly. "Go as fast as you can and don't stop until you reach a town. If you feel sick, keep swimming. If you feel faint, keep swimming. If you feel scared, keep swimming." The woman stared up at him. "You're one of them, aren't you?" "I don't know what you're talking about. You've lost a lot of blood, lady. You're confused." A sea horn sounded. He looked up and swore. 3 guards were headed in his direction, and they were gaining speed. "Lucky for you, help is on the way." He turned and swam away before she could say anything else. Had the guards seen him? It didn't matter. The woman could describe him to the guards. He had never been seen before. The boss would not be pleased. Augustine knew better than to look back, for seconds mattered right now. He was fast, but the guards wore jet propulsion packs around their waists. He followed the shark's idea and headed into the sea kelp. He swam lower and faster, using the sea kelp as cover. He thought of his daughters. He thought of his mission. He thought of his people. "Halt!" a voice called out behind him. Augustine gripped his knife again and thought. Where was he? Could he make it to the wastelands? Would the guard follow him? He glanced to his right where even rows of plants swayed. Farmland. A spear rushed to the water beside him. He looked to the left. There was a rocky area nearby, but he doubted that he could hide there. Could he use it to distract the guard? He swerved toward it and swam higher in the kelp. "I said halt!" Augustine, knew better. He would take his life before he fell into enemy hands. He shifted his fins just slightly and then darted in between 2 rocks. He could hear the merman swimming behind him. He dove down and around the rocks, but the guards stayed close. He had no choice now. The contents of his bag were too important. He swam around another boulder, but this time he stopped and turned around. The guard didn't see his knife coming. Augustine didn't see the shark coming. He screamed as the creature's teeth ripped into his hand. He slashed at the shark's face and swatted it with his tail. The shark let go and seized the bleeding body of the guard instead. Augustine swam out of the rocky area and into the uncharted waters that lay beyond. He shoved his good hand into the medical bag as he swam, yanked out another bandage, and wrapped it around his throbbing hand. The guards could follow the blood for a short time, but he wasn't as worried about that. It was the other scarier creatures he feared. The ocean had all kinds of dangerous creatures, but deep in the wastelands there were wild Brutani with a sweet tooth for merfolk. He swam up to a spot behind a large rock, high enough to hide his body and low enough for him to peek over easily. He chanced to look back now and sighed with relief. No guards. He flicked his bag open. His hand wavered over the bottle of pain relief. On one hand, reducing the pain would help him focus better on the journey home, but the pain might also keep him alert. He gripped the top for a second and then pushed it back into his bag. Another glance over the rock satisfied him. The other guards must have taken the wounded woman home. With the 3rd dead, he had a substantial lead. He risked a quick swim up and looked around. On one side of the ocean floor, the sea plants lay in cultivated rows. The plants on the other side grew however and wherever they wanted. He thought of his children as he wrapped his hand with one more bandage just in case he bled through the first. He closed the bag and secured it to his body again before taking off. He would take his own advice. Swim. Don't look back. Don't stop. Don't think. Just swim. He would stay along the border of the wasteland and swim furiously until he reached the safety of his home. It hadn't always been like this, the stealing and the patrolling and the loss of lives. Once they had been a peaceful community, but the love of power had snaked its way through their people. As the corruption grew, so did a movement against it. Next, stories spread through both groups, and life became harder. They had to meet in secret then, behind closed door and at odd hours. Then came the weekend when the waters of the merfolk were filled with blood. Augustine closed his eyes and thought of his wife when she was alive and well. She had been the light of his life, the reason he got up each morning smiling. But he had lost her that weekend and just barely escaped with his children. He clenched his hands as he thought of her lying on the floor of their home, never to swim again. No. He wiped away the image from his mind. He wouldn't sabotage his mission with sad memories. He slowed his pace in order to conserve his energy. The fish and other sea creatures around him swam and scurried normally. The water was a comfortable temperature here, and his sightline was clear. He took the risk of swimming a little higher in order to cut down his travel time. The wastelands were never guarded, In fact, it was where his people had fled after the attack. But as peaceful and beautiful and safe as the wasteland looked, there was terror hidden within. The boss had settled them in an ancient city buried in the middle of the wasteland, and then sent scouts out each day to find something safer. 2 weeks passed. They survived on the meager supply of food they had managed to bring, as well as the safe plants of the wasteland. The enemy didn't pursue them, but they lost people to the terror. The first death was a small child who had wandered too far. The second death was a scout returning home. The third and fourth deaths were 2 young women in the middle of the ancient streets. The scouts were doubled that day. Another week and 2 more deaths later, a team of scouts returned with good news. They had been hiding from the guards in a trench when they found an opening that led to an underground cavern. They left the next day. Augustine remembered the trip and how he had worried for his children's safety every minute until they reached the trench, exhausted and hungry. The terror had left them alone as they traveled. They took it as a positive sign. The group of refugees settled in the cavern. Augustine was given a spot to settle his family, tasked with scavenging food and medicines, excuse me, and provided with childcare while he was gone on missions. His children settled in as well as could be expected. The new rhythms of life were established, and Augustine found himself smiling again. His job was exciting and important, and he was good at it. He was thankful and relieved. He felt the spear collide with his hip, slicing through his scales and burying into his muscles. No! He reached down and broke the shaft of the spear as he lowered himself back down near the sea floor where the grasses grew. He flipped over on his back and looked around, but he saw nothing. Where had the spear come from? Had a guard followed him this far? Were the outer regions being patrolled now? Augustine turned back around and swam hard. His hip ached and blood flowed behind him. He cursed and reached for his bag, but he knew that he was out of bandages. The guards could follow him, and so could the beast. He swam on, thinking as he went. He could absolutely not lead the guards to the hidden refugees. How could he stop the bleeding? He looked around at the plants. Could he use them to bind his wound long enough to reach home? He grabbed at some and yanked. He heard the second spear and moved just in time. The spear buried its head into the ocean floor. Augustine yanked it out and swam further into the wastelands. The guard shouted at him. He made a sharp turn and dove down. It was murky here, and there were places to hide. He didn't use the first one he saw. That would be too obvious. Instead, he continued on, swerving this way and that, until at last he was confident that the guard wasn't directly behind him. He folded some of the leaves against his wound and wrapped the long stalks he had pulled the leaves off of around his waist. He heard the terror as it slipped through the waters nearby. The guard screamed. Augustine hurried out of his spot and away from the continued screaming. His hip burned with every stroke of his fin, but he pushed on. He passed out of the murky waters, through the borderland, and into the civilized part of the ocean floor. The guards didn't see him coming. He killed one with a spear and the other with his knife. He swam. He was being foolish now, but he didn't have any plans other than surviving long enough to reach home. He spotted another set of guards ahead of him a half an hour later and ducked into the fields of a farmer. He continued to swim without a plan, only making decisions as he had to. He was close to the trench now, but he needed to get there without being seen. He swerved away from the direction of the trench and hid behind a school of fish. It wouldn't fool anybody close by, but there was nobody near. Right now he only needed to escape the detection of the guards around the last village. He thought of his wife as he swam. He thought of his children. He pictured them smiling and happy and healthy. Augustine peeked out from behind a plant. The trench and the safety of the darkness were right below him. He scanned the waters all around him and waited, for he knew better than to dive down now. He didn't think that he had been followed, but there was always the possibility that a guard had trailed him and was hiding from him now, waiting for him to make his next move. His wait was agonizing. The pain in his body had increased and his fins shook. Finally, he decided that it had been long enough. He swam low to the sloping ground. Almost there. He checked over his shoulder one last time. He saw the terror this time, slipping through the waters behind him, looking all around. He looked down at his injured waist and hand. Had he left a trail of blood? The beast screeched. Augustine dove for the trench. The only way he would live is if he swam faster. He swam through the pain. He swam through the fear. He did not look back. He swam. So there you go. That is chapter 2, and I think I found like 5 or 6 things I need to change. Oops, I hate that when I'm reading a chapter aloud because I want to edit it right there, but I can't. Anyway, that should give you just enough of a glimpse into the murder world and what's going on. And this book is going to be a changer in the whole series. because, you know, the magical world, they've been really struggling to kind of keep up with the enemy at this point. And things have been coming kind of boom, boom, boom a little bit. And in this book, you're going to really see some more big things happen. And the fun thing is, this shouldn't be fun, should it? It's going to come from both sides. You're going to see big things happen from the enemy, and you're going to see big things happen from the Alliance and the Weaver Council. But you'll have to read the book to get to that point, and I'm still writing it. I don't even know completely what's going to happen. I have an idea, and that's a kind of hint, but this is going to be exciting, and I hope you enjoyed this chapter. I am probably going to put a few little vlogs up here now, but this is going to be the last time I read a chapter for a while until I get enough of the 5th book written, so I'm feeling a little bittersweet now. Anyway, I hope you have a great night. Battle bravely, or day. I don't know when you're watching this. What's wrong with me? It's nighttime here. Anyway, battle bravely, love strongly, and just keep swimming, right? Should I take that out? That's not my theme. It's just swim, right? Just swim. Don't look back. Don't stop. I've messed up this video 16 minutes in. I hope I can fix it. Good night, guys. Bye.